he got so mad, he balled up his fists and he took a stand. And I remember thinking to myself, damn it, I went too far this time. And I put up my hands to block the punch. I knew the punch was coming. And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. And I said, what? He did. I can run again. I haven't been able to run in years. Yeah.
You were running when you were catching Abu Zubaydah.
I could barely run to the bathroom a couple of years ago.
All right. Well, let's get into your actual story, because okay. I know you've told it on Danny Jones's podcast. You've been on Dalton Fisher's podcast as well. He's
another good guy.
Great guy. He's like right down the street here too. But you were not just any guy at the CIA. You, by the end, were a very high level guy. You obviously
quickly.
Yeah. Well, you made your way to the Directorate of Operations, National Clandestine Services, and did a lot before that. And actually, what's interesting to me is, I always ask different guys like how they got recruited, because the CIA seems to have a lot of different modes to do this, and somehow they're able to find people who match a very specific psychological footprint.
Yes, indeed.
So was being a spy or working in, some sort of clandestine type job something you had thought about as a kid that you wanted to do, or did you kind of fall into this?
Yes. I thought about it a lot as a kid. As a little kid, when I was 11 years old, I remember my mom and dad took my brother and sister and I to see our grandparents. They lived in a neighboring town. And when we got there, my grandfather said, did you see the news? They killed the CIA guy in Athens. That was Richard Welch, the CIA station chief. And I remember my grandfather and my dad talking about it like all afternoon that day. And I was fascinated by it. I went to college and I was close friends with a woman named Dimitra Santis. We went out one night, and when we came home, or we went back to her house, she had a message from her mom saying that her father's brother had been assassinated in Athens. He was the U.S. Defense Attaché. Oh, wow. So I used to think about this kind of thing a lot. Like, why are they killing all these intelligence people in Athens? And, when I was a little kid, I wanted walkie-talkies and invisible ink pens and stuff. My parents always used to humor me with these little spy gadgets and stuff, little microphones and stuff that you get at the toy store for $10 and it's worthless, but it's fun. And then I sort of put it out of my head when I was in college. I got a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies. And then I was finishing a master's degree in legislative affairs with a focus on foreign policy analysis, thinking that I would either go into the Foreign Service at the State Department, or maybe do something on Capitol Hill or lobbying or whatever. And then, do you want the whole story?
Please, yeah. That's why you're here.
Yeah, that's true. I had a professor in college who was one of the very few true geniuses that I've ever encountered.
What made him a genius to you?
He had a bachelor's degree from Harvard, a master's degree from Yale, a PhD in psychology from Yale, a PhD in political science from Yale, and an MD from Yale Medical School. Right?
He's smart.
The author of a dozen books, all on psychology and psychiatry. And he was teaching a class called The Psychology of Leadership. So this was my last semester of graduate school.
Maybe like 87, 88, something like that?
Yeah, this would have been, right. This would have been the spring of 88. That's right. And his name was Dr. Gerald Post. I had seen him on TV a bunch of times. Every time there'd be on the History Channel, they would do these documentaries on Hitler's final days or the end of the Stalin era, stuff like that. And he would always give interviews on these documentaries. So he was teaching this class, The Psychology of Leadership. Absolutely fascinating class. It was, why do leaders take the actions that they do? And then what historical impact do these actions have? And you might just think right past it. But one of the examples that he used, and I'll never forget it, was the Yalta conference that helped to define the post-World War II era. Why was that conference held in Yalta of all places, in the Soviet Union. Can you venture a guess? You'll never
No,
guess.
I've never thought about that.
It was because a spy told Stalin that Roosevelt was sick. And so Stalin insisted that the talks be held in Yalta, and Roosevelt had to fly all the way around the war. So he went from the United States to Casablanca, to Cairo, to Tehran, to Yalta, all the way around Europe. By the time he got to Yalta, he was exhausted.
Yeah.
He was also near death.
Yes.
And Stalin insisted that they begin negotiating as soon as the plane landed. And just so he could get to sleep, Roosevelt gave up Poland.
Whoa.
So there's a lot behind these decisions. Yeah. There's a lot behind these decisions. Fascinating class.
Yeah.
So he assigned us a paper. We had to shadow our bosses for a week and then write a psychological profile of our bosses. I was working at the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. At the time, it was the biggest union within the AFL-CIO. And I worked for a guy who I feared a little bit. He was this mean, big, old school union organizer. He had participated in a strike at a previous job. He was with the women's, what was it? The fabric, whatever the women's, clothing union was, whatever. And some scabs had beaten him up and they broke his back. He wore this awful brace that went from his neck to his waist just to hold his spine together. He was just a mean, tough, old-time guy.
Yeah.
And on Wednesday of that week, we got into an argument and I called him a racist, which he was. He was a racist.
Ooh.
He got so mad, he balled up his fists and he took a stand. And I remember thinking to myself, damn it, I went too far this time. And I put up my hands to block the punch. I knew the punch was coming. And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours. And I said, what? He did. And he goes, my penis is bigger than yours.
You're like, present it.
I said, you know what? I said, you're nuts. You're nuts. And I quit. And I walked out. I went back to my apartment. I typed my paper. And I said he was a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. And then I had footnotes from all these, psych journals and whatever. So I hand in the paper. A week later, I get the paper back. I got an A. And he wrote two things in the margin. Dr. Post did. He wrote, I didn't say in the paper I'd quit because it was irrelevant to the paper. But he said, I've never done this before, but I urge you to quit this job. I agree that he is a sociopath with psychopathic tendencies. Wow. And then he wrote underneath, please see me after class.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I went to see him. I said, Dr. Post, you wanted to see me. He says, come down to my office. It was in the same building. So I walked down to his office. He closes the door and he says, look, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here. And I'm looking for people who might fit into the CIA's culture. And I think you would fit. Would you like to join the CIA?
Now, what's going through your head? You're in your professor.
Yes! Yes! That's what was going through my head.
This is interesting, though, that he would pick this paper was specifically what you wrote about to choose you. Because when I've had guys in the past, like Bustamante, like Jim Lawler, I'm actually going to cite Jim Lawler on this one because he's the guy that talks about this a lot. He really digs into the psychological profiles that the CIA looks for.
Oh, it's deep.
Oh, yeah.
It's deep.
But one of the things he says is that he's like the CIA, especially for covert spies,
yes, they
want people who are dangerously straddling, you know what I'm going to say, dangerously straddling the line of being a sociopath, but they're not quite a sociopath. We all straddle that line. I'm glad you raised that. Yeah. And I want to respond to that and then go back to give you a little bit more detail. After I left the CIA, I met a guy at the CIA who became a dear friend. And talk about a consummate overachiever. He's a CIA psychiatrist. So he has an MD and a PhD in psychology. He happens to be a brigadier general in the Army,
as well, Army Reserve. And we go to the same church. We are in the same men's group, so we hang out. Greek guy. So he told me that the CIA actively seeks to hire people who have sociopathic tendencies, not sociopaths.
That's right.
Because sociopaths have no conscience.
Yep.
They're impossible to control, and they blow right through the polygraph because they don't ever feel guilt.
Right.
So if you have a sociopathic tendency as part of your personality, you do feel guilt, but you're still happy to break the law if you're instructed to do so. And I'll give you an example. When Dr. Post got me into the process, and I'll go back to the beginning of that process in a moment, I was in a group of 5 other applicants, and the interviewer there said, "Let's do an exercise." He says, "Let's say you're serving overseas as a CIA operations officer, and you get a cable from headquarters saying that they need next year's economic figures for Indonesia. So you begin to develop the Indonesian economic secretary, okay, at the embassy in the country where you're serving. And this guy becomes your best friend, which is the goal.
Yeah.
So you're developing him, you're taking him to dinner, you're hanging out, your wives become friends, you go on vacation together. You're doing this for whatever, 6 months, 12 months, and you determine he's not recruitable. What do you do? Headquarters needs the information. So what do you do? And one guy raises his hand. He says, you double down. You just keep doing it. You go out with him more. You spend more money. Okay. What else would you do? This girl raises her hand and she says, maybe you get the wife involved. Maybe your wife can improve her relationship with his wife, and then you get the wife involved. And I'm looking around like, is nobody paying any attention here? I raised my hand. I said, you break into the embassy and you steal it.
Keep them.
He says, that's exactly what you do. That's exactly what you do. Well, that's a sociopathic tendency. Like, what are we wasting all this time for? You break in. Why do we have all these people who can defeat alarms and pick locks? What are they just going to sit at home doing nothing? You fly them out, you break into the embassy, you steal it, and everybody's happy.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.